SuperTalk Mississippi Media production.
Did you know Toyota of Brookhaven has sold more new vehicles the last 2 years than any other dealership in Southwest Mississippi? Come see why. Exit 40 Brookhaven or online at ToyotaBrookhaven.com. Great service, great savings. At Toyota of Brookhaven, we deliver.
This is Gerard Gibert, and thank you for listening to MidDays here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music on this
Friday, y'all.
I'm still breathing a bit hard, just barely got in this old chair. Time for the intro, taking care of a little personal matter this morning. I saw you walking in. I was in my vehicle. On the phone, trying to help out a friend with something. And so we're here. That's the one thing, I've said it before, and you know it all too well. You got to be in this chair at the right time. You can't say, I'll be there in just a minute, right? Like I can at home with my wife. Not that there aren't consequences for that. You got to be in this chair.
Oh, yeah. The time crunch is real.
But that's fine. No big deal. We're here. I'm just trying to catch my breath a little bit.
That seems to be a part of really any entertainment industry or genre. I mean, from podcasts to YouTube videos to TV shows to movies. If there is a set time they are supposed to be released, it better be released then, or there are consequences. If it's a podcast or a YouTube channel, the algorithm's going to demote you. It's not going to show you as much if you're not on a set schedule. If it's a movie, if you're waiting for a movie to come out and they push that release date back, that's a pretty good sign. Uh-oh, something's wrong. They had to go back and do reshoots and stuff. So entertainment, timeliness matters.
No doubt. The closest equivalent I could give is, anytime we were doing conversions in the IT world, it's like, you can't just say, hey, we're coming, we'll be there in a minute. Oh, man. And so many times, that, especially when you do with this, what we call forklift upgrades, when you're just taking everything out and putting all new stuff in, you better have all that stuff up and running. And often, given that many of our customers would be 5-day-a-week sort of organizations, typical businesses that or sometimes it would be retail organizations that or others, airlines, for example. That's 7 days a week to healthcare institutions, and you try to plan that out within some window they give you, and man, you better have it done. It's pretty stressful, but we're here, ready to go. The markets again in a free fall. Because of the tariffs. Well, not just because of the tariffs, because yesterday, of course, we had a significant sell-off as a result of Liberation Day, the day before. But this morning, early on, China. We shouldn't be surprised. They came out and said, okay, we'll take your tariffs and we'll raise you one, right? So they came out and increased tariffs on American goods coming into their country. That's what I call a good old-fashioned trade war. And is it a game of chicken? It feels like it. It feels like it a bit.
A bit.
The NASDAQ presently down 648. And the New York Stock Exchange is the Dow, should say, the NYSE Composite, 700 points. The Dow's down as well. Last I checked, it was about, 1,200 points. Rhino, you're looking at it now. Let's see. And the funny money, it really ain't moving. 1,148 for the Dow. You know, you always got to look at the silver lining. And this is short term, I believe. The question is, how short term? And I'm a little intrigued by people who are saying, it's time to buy. And my question is, buy with what? The average American is not sitting on cash waiting I'm waiting for that market to go down so I can pounce. And so there are concerning aspects of the long-term play. From a short-term perspective, my concern would be, and I mentioned that a bit yesterday, if you're retired, I guarantee you right now, there are people who are retired that maybe don't have their retirement accounts squared away and established with guaranteed annuity-type income. And, man, there's a million different options and approaches to that. That's what, by the way, our friends at Element Wealth that sponsor our show do such a great job of. That's what they can help you with, Jeremy Nelson and his team over there. But I guarantee you there's some of them right now that are polishing off the old resumes. They're looking at their accounts, and they're looking at the balance going down. Except Thomas, of course. He defies the rest of the world because he will tell you his accounts they're rising today. He's figured it out. He's cracked the code. I pick on him a bit. But they're polishing off their resumes. Concern. And then there are others, I would submit, that are approaching retirement that are saying, wait a second, looking in their accounts. Now, there are many others, as you know, that just don't look. I just don't want to know. And then the other thing, Rhino, I have concerns about, something we talk about a lot, at least one of our listeners says I talk about it too much, and that's the public employees retirement system. Because it wasn't too long ago, you remember, when there were members of our legislature that opposed the actuaries reducing the target rate of return, right? They came out and said, wait, we think we're going to do better than that. How do they feel today? Now, I get the last 2 days. That's not a reflection of what a longer period produces in terms of return, and I've explained that as well many times, but it's got them nervous at a minimum. Agree? They got to be.
Yeah, and then you got some people that are going, oh no, we're down to the lows of August.
That's exactly right, but it just depends on how they've been managing that money as to the extent to which it's affected them. You're right about that, so we're kind of where we were in that respect, but I guarantee you they've likely dumped a lot of money in issues since then, anticipating gains, and that's not working out. It seems like last time I looked, the largest single equity holding of the public employees retirement system was Microsoft. That's down, of course. Now, I don't know where it is relative to August. I haven't checked. I haven't checked the chart on it. But no, you're right about that. Now, here's what I think. I hope sincerely that the leaders of other countries, I know they're not tuned into this show, but if they were, I would say, hey, pick the dang phone up and call the President of the United States and tell him you're ready to cut a deal, because this guy's the consummate deal maker. And you know the other thing I like about the President? He likes getting stuff done in a hurry. We all do in business. Unlike those that are elected officials, they're on a different clock, are they not?
Unless it's dropping lawsuits to stop the president from doing something, which I'm confused. These were announced, and I haven't seen hide nor hair of a lawsuit to go to a judge, probably Boasberg again. He's got 5 of them already, to stop Trump from doing this.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Where's the lawsuit? They stopped him doing everything else.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe that's coming. Maybe that's being cooked up. I just saw something flash on the screen here about Newsom, like they're trying to opt out of it or something like that. Of course, this is the same guy. Have you seen this? They want to. I seem to remember this coming up a couple of years ago, and you and I talked about it. They want to structure their traffic citations based on the income of the violator. Didn't we talk about that 2 or 3 years ago? They had such a plan. That's on the table again in California. Oh, you're doing 150 in a 40? $10, please, because you only make $200,000 a year, which is poverty in California.
I mean, to play devil's advocate a bit, the logic behind that is to individuals of a certain income and higher, a fine-based penalization is simply the price to break the law.
That's exactly right.
Oh, I can't double park in front of the 5-star restaurant that I've had a reservation to for a month. Tow it. It'll cost me $1,000. If $1,000 to you is $10 to somebody else, that's the price to park your car there.
You're absolutely right. And kind of like the $900 threshold, right? Okay, so and just to remind folks of that, if you steal less than $900, that's not a felony in California. And they got calculators in the stores. Okay, all right, Rhino. The premier of Vietnam must be tuned into Middays because the president is reporting they just had a conversation. We'll talk about it on the other side of the break. It is Middays. We're in the Element Well studio, and we're coming right back.
How are you doing?
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
Check it out. Let's do this.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's get on with it.
On SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It is Middays. We're live in the Element Well studios. The Dow and the NASDAQ have paired their losses a bit. The VIX, the old volatility index, it is up now. In pre-market, we saw the Dow down as much as, I think, 1,400 points. And the NASDAQ was teetering on 1,000. But before we went to break, I was sharing with you that apparently the president, or the premier, I think is the title, of Vietnam and our president had a discussion. And right before that, I said, man, if I were a foreign leader, I'd call the president of the United States, because he knows, and he, our president knows, he is negotiating from a point of strength and leverage. And I'd call the president of the United States, and I'd be talking about cutting a deal. That's what I'd do. And so the president of the United States went to his Truth Social account and announced and informed the country about this conversation. Rhino, would you read it for us?
Yeah, it says, just had a very productive call with To Lam, General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, who told me that Vietnam wants to cut their tariffs down to zero if they're able to make an agreement with the U.S. I thanked him on behalf of our country and said I look forward to a meeting in the near future.
Okay. And he also continues by imploring Fed Chairman Jerome Powell to cut them interest rates, right, in all caps. You see that, Rhino? That could be a different post that flashed up on the screen here.
Yeah, that was a couple minutes later. It said this would be the perfect time for Fed Chairman Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. He was always late, in quotation marks. But he could now change his image, and quickly energy prices are down, interest rates are down, inflation is down, even eggs are down 69%, and jobs are up. All within 2 months. A big win. I'm trying to do emphasis with how I can't talk like him. For America, cut interest rates, Jerome, and stop playing politics.
Yeah. And so
it's hard to delineate the all uppercase without shouting into the microphone.
And Mr. Trump would appreciate you doing that probably. So a couple of things. And look, I'm going to be perfectly honest here. There's no doubt a silver lining in all this is the price of oil is down, what, Rhino? Almost $10, $9 or so in the last week. What is it trading for right now? I think it's come up a little bit. It's $63 a barrel, $64 a barrel, something in that range.
$62.78.
Okay, there you go. So a week ago is 72. So you see the chart on that. So that's good. I think you're going to see that translate to lower prices at the pump. But let's be honest, that's not because Mr. Trump's policies have had a chance to even take hold with respect to the increase of supply. What's going on here is traders expect, and the price of oil is based on traders trading the commodity in the open market across the world. And the expectation is, okay, we're going to tip into a global recession. That now stands as a 65% probability, according to J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs. Can they get it wrong? Absolutely. All the time we share with you, economists have to have two hands. Well, this could happen, but on the other hand, this could happen. The same thing here. But the indicators are strong that we could. And if that happens, and that's the expectation by the oil traders right now, we're going to need less oil. China is already, you know that, is already in somewhat of a downturn. They consume a fair amount of the world's oil, and that figures into the price. We haven't even benefited from the increase in supply that we expect as a result of taking the government boot off the fossil fuels industry, which was applied by the former president, Joe Biden, who made it clear his intent was to kill the fossil fuels industry. Yes, we're going to kill it. I'll never forget that, man, that interview he had with the remember that, the disabled individual in the wheelchair that spoke through a electronic device. Biden says, yes, we're gonna kill it. No more fossil fuels. Oh my gosh, what a goof. So that's going on. So I think you can expect that. And I don't know how, but the price of eggs is like become the litmus test for inflation. And I've done some research on that. That's mostly due to, first, the bird flu we've seemed to have gotten past that to a great extent. But secondly, the federal government, through the FDA or whoever regulates that, hell, there's so many different regulatory agencies involved in our deadgum food supply, which I hope is going to change. They made some changes in the way that situation's handled, which were just common sense changes. I've read Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins' 5-point plan on that report, and I do think that those policies had a marked change on the price of eggs. But more importantly, we're not experiencing the avian flu the way we were, and so we're not having to go kill all the flocks, which was one of the big problems, was it not, Rhino? Oh, wait, there's one that's about 3 acres over there that seems to have contracted it. We got to kill all of them. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not much, huh?
I think there are actual examples of a handful of birds being the reason for the euthanization of an entire farm.
Well, that's just stupid government. That's what that is. I mean, I'm no expert on chickens and bird flu. That just sounds dumb to me. I mean, we didn't run around and exterminate humans for that, do we? Doesn't make any sense to me. Well, the good news is common sense prevailed, and we have new policy. And so we're starting to see...
Wait, you're saying a pencil pusher with a clipboard and a badge from the federal government might have overreacted to something?
Yes, I am. I know you're shocked.
The thought.
I know you're shocked at that. Oh, man. So you see what's going on here. So, look, again, these are the silver linings. Oh, I forgot the other thing. So we talked about gas. We talked about eggs, which everybody seems to be focused on.
Well, they were.
But right, which the president's bragging about how that's come down, and he can take some credit for that. Let's be honest. No matter who's in the White House, good or bad, you get hung with it, even though you had nothing to do with it. That's just the way we Americans think. Blame it on the president. Give the president credit. In this case, you have to give him credit for just implementing some common sense regulations, but also just the fact that we're sort of post the big spread of avian flu and the flocks in the production of eggs and the supply is stabilized, thus the price is down. But the other big thing that's going on is you've seen this, the 10-year Treasury. That's fallen below 4%. Again, that's because of the expectations of a recession. Why is that important? Because that's what your mortgages are tied to. I guarantee you there's people out there shopping for houses today as a result of the mortgage rates falling. I haven't checked the mortgage rates today, but they are tied directly to the 10-year Treasury. And the same with your credit card rates and any sort of chattel mortgages, such as a loan for a vehicle. All the above are tied to the 10-year interest rate. And when it's going down, that's good news for interest rates. Now, you just read that the president is essentially calling for Fed Chairman Jerome Powell to cut rates. Rhino, 2 weeks ago, the rate prognosticators, there actually is a rate futures market. They were saying maybe 2 cuts this year, right, with a 25% chance of a cut next time they meet next month. Now, that's all been updated. They're saying 60% chance of a cut next month and 5 cuts this year. If that happens, guys, the markets will absolutely go meteoric. And that's fantastic. And then Jerome...
Niche markets like that just crack me up.
Why is that?
It's just gambling for the exceedingly wealthy.
Well, I wouldn't say that about mortgage rates. That's not just for the exceedingly wealthy.
But when it's a market on cuts.
Oh, yeah. I get it. I've never invested in that, but it is crazy to me that there's a futures market on what the heck the rates are going. Is there anything in this country, honestly, Rhino, you can't bet on?
Well, mobile sports betting in Mississippi.
Oh, no, you're wrong, my young friend. They're still doing it. We just ain't getting any money for it because we have boneheaded members of our legislature, particularly in the Senate. And this is where Senator David Blunt, as much as I think he's a really good guy and enjoyed interviewing him, I haven't seen you since then, when we were down at the Trademark. I thought that was a great discussion we had. He makes no bones about it. He opposes it. I disagree with him on that. Let the people place their mobile sports bets. He was a little shocked when I told him how much North Carolina had produced over that. We're coming right back.
I'm all shook up.
From the SeabrookPaint.com with
Gerard Gibert.
Welcome to our shop
On SuperTalk Mississippi.
Okay, now you have a good one.
Well, it's you and me, baby, no one else we could trust. We'll say nothing to no one, no how, or we bust and never crack a smile or flinch or cry for nobody.
We are back in the Element Wealth studio. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, that tweet, not tweet anymore, but his post, the president's on his Truth Social platform, talking about his conversation with the Vietnamese. It is a premier, right? Did I get that
General
right?
Secretary.
Okay, what the heck. Nonetheless, that's encouraging. So I do believe that you would see a domino effect. If the president report that, hey, they want to go to zero tariffs, is true. Now, the tariffs Vietnam charges on this country are already fairly low. That's why China tries to route lots of products. I call it trade laundering through Vietnam to avoid the direct tariff on goods that come from China into this country. So, if that's true, and we see a domino effect and other countries begin to fall in line, That's certainly not what China did this morning. It's not what Canada did yesterday. But if that should happen, man, I think we're off to the races. I really do. And that'd be fantastic. And I know that's the goal. But something else did occur to me. I know that there's lots of talk from the president and from the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. He said the other day this could generate a whole bunch of money for this country. He said $600 billion a year in tariff revenue. However, if the tariffs have the desired effect to reshore manufacturing, and the majority, if not all, which I think is what the goal is, of what Americans consume are manufactured in America, there won't be any tariff revenue. There'll be nothing to levy. So it's a little dangerous to say, yeah, we're going to eliminate the income tax and replace it with tariffs, if at the same time we're trying to bring manufacturing home and produce everything here, which is fantastic. It's more so to me from a national security perspective than even an economic perspective. I'm not quite as overly optimistic about the economic impact of that as I am just the security and the relief I think we would have as Americans and American businesses would have, knowing that we're not so deadgum reliant, honestly, to some extent, on our most ardent foe, which is China. I don't really mind so much stuff coming from Canada and Mexico. They don't bother me as much as China. That bothers me because they could pull the plug. Did we not learn our lesson in COVID? And that all, guys, goes back. You do the research on that. It was McKinsey, one of the biggest consulting firms, most prestigious in the world. They're the ones that 40 years ago told all those pharmaceutical companies, well, you can pay $20 an hour for an American laborer in your factory, or you can pay about 50 cents over in China. I don't know what the number is, but it ain't much. And they said, oh, okay, we get it. You can't blame them. How can you blame a company for seeking the lowest cost producing model? I wish our government would do that. You can't blame them for that.
Yeah, it's hard to get accurate wage numbers out of China, but you can't imagine the conditions in a factory in China are very good if the factory in question has an open-air courtyard that they have to install safety nets on a couple floors to keep people from jumping into the courtyard.
It's insane. We can't compete with that. But you know what we can compete with? Highly automated, sophisticated, super digitized production facilities. That's what's going to happen. And, man, that's, I think, good news. Because then I believe it's possible for us to make stuff in this country at a lower cost than it is currently being made for in China with Chinese, essentially slave labor, operating in gun-to-your-head slave conditions, as Rhino just pointed out. It would end that practice because you know why? They wouldn't have any customers. They're not going to consume all that in their country. Hell, their people don't have any money to buy anything except the top few. That's what happens in communist countries, does it not? That's the whole goal of Marxism and communism. There ain't no doubt. It's the Politburo versus the proletariat. So I think that would be a good outcome here. And I think on that basis, that's very positive for the country. The concern, I think, that a lot of people have is how long? How long does it take for these reactions to season, to materialize, to come to fruition? Those who are looking at their accounts right now, thinking about retiring, are probably delaying that. Those who are trying to figure out how their money's going to last. And there are a lot of people that said, man, I wish I had some cash. I'd invest right now because I think the future is certainly pretty bright. I don't know why so many people are panic selling in the markets. I think it's overblown big time. The fundamentals aren't that bad. Even if we do tip into a recession, I don't expect it to be severe. And how do you define that? usually it's defined by massive job loss. That's the feature of a recession that is the most concerning, and it will be a political liability if that happens. And so what we got to hope is that the expected benefit of these tariffs occurs in a fairly short order. I tell you what needs to occur in a short order is the dang Congress passing the Trump tax cuts. That would be a huge stimulus for the economy and give businesses the comfort and the certainty they need. They don't have it right now. And you've probably seen something that really galls me. There are Republicans now in the U.S. Senate talking about creating a new tax bracket for all those with income over $1 million. What? Are you kidding me? You're just going to hand that to the Democrats who have been blasting Republicans since the Trump Tax Act passed in 2017. You just helped all the millionaires and the billionaires, and some have even clamored, you're stealing the benefits from others because you're not taking more from the wealthy in this country. If that ain't Marxism, communism, redistribution, I don't know what is. And we have Republicans seriously talking about that. Let's create a new tax bracket, 40% of all income over $1 million. And there are a lot of people, I'm sure, maybe even people listening said, well, I don't have to worry about that. I don't make $1 million. Yes, you do. It will affect you. That's the part they don't get. They think, oh, it just means the millionaires, they just have to give a little more money to the government. No, that's not what it means. Not whatsoever. It means they spend less, they invest less, they take less risk. They create fewer companies. They create fewer jobs because they look at it and say, why do I want all the hassle, all the risk, all the sacrifice, all the time to give 40% of everything over $1 million to the stupid government to go spend it on junk? That's a bad move, Republicans. You will seal the fate of the midterms, meaning we'll get wiped out in both chambers if you act on that. Come up with something else.
Unless it's offset with elimination of income tax for everybody under $150,000, because then you're going to have a whole bunch of people show up to vote for their pocketbook of, well, I don't have to pay any income tax anymore.
You're right about that, which would be devastating, in my view, to the economy.
But that's the populism part.
I agree. And if you think that we're too reliant, and I know the Democrats don't believe this, and even some Republicans probably don't understand. It's talking about voters, that we are totally reliant on those upper incomes, not only for the money they send to the Treasury, because we know they shoulder about 46%, the top 1% shoulder 46% of the revenues that inflow to the Treasury. They also account for about half the consumption. And without them consuming, there's no companies, there's no manufacturing, there's no jobs. Do they not get that? I guess not. Now, they will say, and I don't care what you call it, they'll say, oh, that's that hokey, farcical, trickle-down economics. I don't care if you call it polka dot. It doesn't really matter. It's just reality. It's just fact. Oh, look at them. They go out and buy jets. Who the hell you think makes the jets and everything that goes in them? And all the ancillary services necessary. I just picked that out because you typically associate that with a wealthy person. You don't think that that's good economic activity? My gosh. Man, they just don't get it whatsoever. And only in this country is it possible for so many people to achieve that level of wealth. But if the Democrats had their way, and now apparently some Republicans, at the prospect of increasing the tax rate, creating a new tax bracket, they don't get that either, man. We're stepping aside for a break. Caleb Saylors, multimedia journalist, SuperTalk Mississippi News at 11:20. Richard Roberson, president and CEO of Mississippi Hospital Association at 12:05.
Covering the stories that matter most to Mississippians. Gerard Gibert. Middays with Gerard. Super Talk, Mississippi.
Hey, mama, said the way you move, gonna make you sweat, gonna make you groove. you stay. That way, my honey drip can't keep away.
Welcome back, everyone. It's middays. Going to get to some text. The text line, the C Spire text line is open, 601-879-4395. I trust President Trump on tariffs, says Pam in Ridgeland. There may be some temporary birthing pains, but the U.S. will profit in the long term. Let's be patient and remember our president is a master in the art of the deal. I hear you, Pam. And a serious question, and I'm not being argumentative here with you, but what would you say to a person who doesn't have a lot of time? They're elderly. They're looking at their retirement accounts. They're trying to figure out, now that they've seen this rather sharp loss. And the same thing happened during the COVID era, as you recall, Rhino. People were panicking over that. But you knew that that was caused by something that was truly an anomaly, an aberration, that was inflicted, we now know, and I think knew it all along, by some really nefarious people in China, with a little help, unfortunately, from our own government under Dr. Anthony Fauci. So it's just a matter of timing. How long? And what if this doesn't work out? And let's just look out in the crystal ball a little bit in the future, and let's say that, okay, this takes 5 years. And we tip into a recession, folks start losing their jobs, and I think there's no doubt if these tariffs hold, you're going to see the price of stuff go up. And that will have a political effect. And then we turn over the Congress to the Democrats, and it would make it harder then to win the White House in 28. And then they come in and just reverse everything and make everything 1,000 times worse. That's the risk going on here. I'm not so sure that trying to tackle that and the tax cuts simultaneously was the best approach. And time will tell. There's just no way to tell at this point. And that's even Senator John Kennedy. He's never at a loss for something interesting to say. He said a couple of days ago that a lot of people may not live long enough to realize the benefits of this. So their entire future is at risk from a financial perspective. I've heard some people say, well, today an American product's $25 and a Chinese product's $15. If we impose tariffs, now the Chinese product is $25 or $35. You buy the American product. And I would maintain that, no, if there's an American product out there that's 25 versus a Chinese that's 15, nobody's buying the American product. I think the vast majority of people are unwilling to pay a premium that you can't even tell. And a lot of the stuff you buy, like a vehicle that's from an American headquartered car manufacturer, now we've learned that the vast majority of the innards in those vehicles is made overseas. So how do you tell these days, Rhino? It's not like we don't have a requirement, do we, that requires manufacturers to place some sort of label or on the product that tells you where it's made. It's not like foods, we have labeling requirements on foods. You almost have to be like a nutritionist to understand the labels, honestly. We don't do that in this country. It
requires a certain level of responsibility on the consumer's part to understand who they are purchasing from, and in an ever increasingly or ever shrinking global economy.
Yeah.
From the standpoint of the easiest access we've ever had to goods and services from around the world, you don't really have the same access to all of that information as to what is made where, who made it when, and how many hands it went through before it got to you.
And I think that would help, though. I mean, I do think there are some people that would likely pay a premium. Okay, this one's $10, it's made in America. This one's $5, it's made in China. I'm going to buy the $10.
If it were easier to delineate. Yeah.
Right, but you can't right now, honestly. I think probably everybody listening here on the show probably shops at Walmart. I'm not sure there's anybody in America that doesn't. How much of that stuff, when you walk in the door, is made abroad? A lot of it. And that's largely because to make it here is cost prohibitive. That's just a fact. Between our regulations, which are onerous, and the egregious labor costs as well, because unions have demanded that, and you have to put some of this at their feet, right? They drove American companies abroad. Wait, you want how much an hour? Plus these benefits that are fit for a king? No, I think we're going somewhere else. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I know that there are a lot of people that think, oh, yeah, well, these American manufacturers, they're just greedy. Well, of course, they're going to try to figure out how to make the most money. And guess what? All of us that invest our money in those companies, like what's in your 401k plan, we expect them to maximize and optimize their profit. We're stepping aside for a break. It's time for Fox News and SuperTalk News. We're coming right back on Middays in the Element Wealth studio.
Hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
Welcome to the show that challenges you to think deeply, and look beyond political posturing. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. We are live from the Element Wealth studio on this
Friday, y'all.
You got Gerard and Rhino. So, just looking at a couple of more texts here on the C Spire text line, 601-879-4395. Amanda from Pike County says, just an FYI, it takes between 4 to 6 months for a new hen to start laying eggs. It depends on the breed. So maybe soon new flocks will start producing. That would be good news. That would increase the supply. Thanks for that, Amanda. And
I think it's already happening.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why the prices come down. I mean, it's just a function of increased supply. That's what's going on here. And that is because the demand and supply balance is starting to stabilize because they're not getting wiped out by flu. But more importantly, we don't have stupid government regulations that say you got to kill every bird in your hen house. Man, oh man. Josh from Laurel says hardcore gamblers will gamble on raindrops running down a window. We were talking earlier about the futures of interest rates. There actually is a market for that you can invest in. It is highly risky. I just made the comment, is there anything people won't bet on? Rhino said, yeah, you can't do mobile sports betting in Mississippi. Oh, man.
It's the whole, I've seen this joke, so I can't take credit for it. I'm just regurgitating it, and I'm taking about 4 different versions, putting it into one. But do you think with the announcement that DoorDash is now going to have a payment plan for your food delivery, do you think there will be a futures market on that debt?
I haven't thought about a futures market on the debt, but we are talking about I would expect a significant increase in debt as a result.
Or perhaps a market for the individual debt. Like, okay, I got $100, says they're not going to pay off that burrito.
Well, what about even worse? What about derivatives on that? I'll take the debt on the burrito. You have the nachos, right? Oh, my gosh. Oh, man. Yeah, that's kind of scary when you're financing your dinner over 4 easy, convenient payments. 2 months to pay for your dinner.
And again, I ask, is that a sign that things are going good? Or a sign that things are going very badly?
I would have to say the latter would be my opinion. When you're financing your dinner, I don't mean just on your normal credit card. I mean installment payments is what Rhino's talking about. That's what the BNPL stuff is. By the way, those stocks are down, and I'm not sure why today. Of course, everything is. What's not down today?
The funny money.
Yeah, the funny money is hanging in there for sure. Let's see what else we got on the C Spire text line. Tim from Tupelo says, when the so-called experts say don't buy a stock, and I've done my own research, I buy it. When they say interest rates will do a certain thing, believe right the opposite 99% of the time, the experts are no expert. Well, I think that's probably a bit of an exaggeration there, Tim. It depends on the expert to whom you refer. If it's Kramer, yeah, I would say that would be accurate. The Dow in correction territory. The NASDAQ is hibernating now in bear market territory. The tariffs are really hurting the furniture business. Textiles will never come back to the USA because of EPA regulations. There's no doubt. And this is a great point. That's on the C Spire text line. You got to look at this in combination, in conjunction with getting the dang tax cuts passed. And then, of course, deregulation. Because all of that does play a role and are huge factors in economic growth and prosperity. So it's I think it's a little naive and short-sighted just to focus on one.
It's overburdensome regulations that are the reason you cannot buy a small pickup truck in the United States.
That's what I've heard. And I think that's what the kind of stuff we got to address, and I'm hoping the Trump administration will do that. I mean, we're seeing evidence of that throughout the Trump administration.
At least not a new one. You could still buy the used ones, but thanks for cash for clunkers, a lot of those are gone too. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. Kevin in Pontotoc says manufacturing represents... Yeah, we actually talked about this, Kevin. So the manufacturing industry gets a lot of focus, and most presidents tend to always point to that as kind of a litmus test, if not just a benchmark for economic performance and status. And historically in this country, the manufacturing sector has always been in that 10 to 12% range of the total economy. Manufacturing jobs peaked in the 70s, about 30%. You and I looked that up the other day.
Yeah, it was June 1979 was the height of manufacturing employment in the U.S., and then there was a significant dip in the early 80s, like December 1982, rebounded again and stayed relatively level until the mid-2000.
Okay.
By November of 2000, manufacturing employment just falls off a cliff and basically halves itself on the way to February 2010. And then it's slowly been creeping up since then.
Okay, so let me ask you for clarification. Halves itself in terms of its percent of the total workforce, or halves itself in terms of the total number of workers?
Total number of workers.
Okay. Well, and that's an easy, what am I trying to say, cause for that. And that would just be automation. We just don't need as many people. And that's something that I hope folks understand. Even if all these factories come back to this country, they're not going to be lined up shoulder to shoulder in the factory doing jobs that machines do. And in fact, if that's the case, we won't be able to afford anything they produce. You think about what labor costs are today, especially when you layer onto that all the other ancillary costs associated with an employee. Time off. We've gotten way more generous with that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it does cost money. Health care benefits, heck, that's through the dang roof. And if you don't offer them, you can't compete. Got Social Security, Medicare, unemployment, workers' comp. Got a lot of burden with what's called burden associated with that. But the fundamental driver of the reduction of manufacturing labor is automation. And that's, I think, going to continue to be the case because all these companies, once again, they're trying to figure out how can we cut costs, and they look at their labor costs. Okay, how can we automate that? I mean, that's been going on since Henry Ford, is it not? Before that even, honestly. So, but he's kind of the one that
he figured out the production line.
The so-called, that's right, the mass production.
Mass manufacturing and mass production before that, but the assembly line was the game changer.
Right. He was the one that concocted that, that devised that.
Because it allowed for a smaller workforce to produce more.
Which made the Model T, that's what he said, everybody in America should be able to afford a motor vehicle. That was his goal, was it not?
And you can have it in any color as long as that color's black.
In black. So I got a friend that just texted in and said, what about NAFTA? Yeah, so it was Ross Perot that warned against that. That sucking sound you hear, that's the sound of America's factories shutting down as they move production into Canada and Mexico. But the simple reason is because, please tell the audience again, Rhino, what does that auto worker laborer in Mexico make per day?
Yeah, if you're working on the line at a car manufacturing facility in Mexico, you're making anywhere from $8 to $35 a day.
And the average automobile worker in the United States, union worker?
Depending on the position, you're getting probably a starting salary around 20, probably north of that per hour.
Right.
Up to 40-ish an hour.
Plus in this country, because we're very generous with the benefits, you got to tack on at least another 25%, 30% on that to account for those other costs. Social Security, Medicare, health insurance, pensions, time off, all kinds of other benefits. I mean, they've got creative because that's how we compete. You know, speaking of which, there was no such thing as what started out as fringe benefits until World War II. World War II is how we in this country, for the most part, obtain our health insurance from our employer, the group plans offered by our employer. That's because the government instituted wage and price controls to fight the war, and employers, in an effort to compete for labor, for talent, they came up with this idea, well, okay, we can't pay them more money in the form of salary and wages, but we can give them something else. And that's what gave rise to health insurance, as an example, as a benefit that you obtain through your employer, and your employer typically pays some share of that. Before that, there was no such thing as get your health insurance from your employer. We're stepping aside for a break. When we return, it's Caleb Saylor's SuperTalk Mississippi News.
Hey, this is
the talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
We're rolling. Hit it. Go. Play it.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. We are live in the Element Well studio. We thank you for joining us. Right now, we're pleased to welcome Caleb Saylor's multimedia journalist, SuperTalk Mississippi News.
I might pursue a career in music if Rhino keeps me energetic today. Goodness, Rhino, you always got it going on, man.
All right there, Caleb. I guess the first thing you're going to talk to us about is how we're going to get a budget here for the state of Mississippi.
Well, I mean, Gerard, it looks like we're going to be heading toward a special session soon. How soon, I'm not entirely sure, but Governor Tate Reeves did hold a press conference yesterday, and he announced that there are plans to hold a special session at some point. You know, June 30th is the deadline for the legislature to finalize a budget, for it to be, completely finalized, and us to have a budget, $7 billion budget to run our state government. But so a little backstory, Gerard, I know you've talked about this on your show, but for our listeners who haven't heard this, over the weekend, this past weekend, it was conference weekend, and the Senate showed up eager to hammer out a budget with the House. Well, the House decided not to show up. And House Speaker Jason White outlined why. He took to social media explaining that he didn't believe in going to behind closed door meetings on the weekend and rush out a budget. He said, we'll conduct business again this week, and we'll give the Senate an opportunity to meet with us, and we can extend the session and then go from there. And the House did. They offered an amendment or a concurrent resolution to extend the regular legislative session. And the Senate just had a fundamental disagreement with that. They didn't oblige. And so the rules were not suspended to extend the session to finalize a budget. And so both chambers adjourned sine die without a budget being sent to the governor. And so Tate Reeves, obviously our governor, had to respond, had to say something, all right, give the people an update on what the heck is going on. And the governor was very positive, Gerard. He was very optimistic yesterday in his press conference where he talked about how I'm going to assure the people, this is what he said, I'm going to assure taxpayers the government's not going to shut down. We're not going to lose our core functions. It's going to be okay. And he seemed optimistic, too, that the House and Senate, though there's been a lot of infighting this session, and I want to talk about that in a second, Gerard, but he seemed optimistic that there is going to be a budget, that the fighting has been over fundamental differences in approach to getting things done, but not really over the budget itself. And I really haven't seen a ton of disagreement between the cross-chamber counterparts about the budget specifically. Now, I know they've argued over taxes, over school choice, etc., but the budget, there really hasn't been any major disagreements. They just disagree with the approach. And so the governor said that he's convinced that the House and Senate aren't too far apart on this and that they can come together and we can get something done ahead of July 1st. So to avert a government shutdown, a state government shutdown.
Yeah. Never heard that before, shutting down the state government, huh?
No.
I know some of the agencies are talking about it. They're pretty nervous about this right now.
But the governor sounded reassuring yesterday, and so we'll see. I mean, maybe he's more optimistic than some, and maybe he's – I don't know. There has been a lot of drama this session. Gerard, looking back at last session 1 year ago where – we had all these fights over Medicaid expansion or changing the education formula, and it was a very dramatic session. I thought going into this one, I'm like, well, it's not the first year of a newly elected or a second-term governor, and so this one should be a lighter – it's going to be a shorter and a lighter session. Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, this was probably as dramatic of a session as I can remember. And
I don't know that we had on our bingo card, that we were going to have this tax reform debate. And it was going to be that contentious. Right.
And then that there would be a typo and that it would cause bad blood between the two chambers. And I mean, Senator Nicole Akins-Boyd was on your program, and I give her a lot of credit for speaking openly and candidly about how she feels, while some beat around the bush and will make jokes about how they feel about the whole tax ordeal. She said it out loud. She said, I didn't appreciate how the House handled that. Yeah. I didn't appreciate them not coming to us with the error. She says if it happened on our end of the chamber, on our end of the Capitol, we would have gone to the other side and told them, hey, there's a mistake here. We can correct this and work to this. And she said she didn't appreciate how that happened on the House's side. And then she also talked about her party, the Republican Party, that has a supermajority in Mississippi in both the House and Senate, yet can't really seem to come together on much of anything. And she talked about how she was disappointed in the party kind of fundamentally right now in Mississippi. And a lot of people look at our legislature and how they've conducted business this year, and it is kind of sad to see the infighting, the tomato throwing among leaders on both sides, and hopefully a special session can remedy some of these issues. I'm not going to hold my breath on that.
I don't think so. There's no consensus among the legislature on what direction we should go in from some of these complex policy perspectives. Now, the House, I think I shared it with you, they actually did pass a resolution that would have kept us in session.
Right, and I talked about that. Yeah, HCR 70. Yes, to suspend the rules, keep us in session. The Senate said no.
But there was a typo.
Yeah, a date typo.
Right. So the House committed a typo error as well.
Now, my question though was that a typo that we missed it, or were they trolling? See,
I don't know. And just so our audience will know, the typo was that they were resolving in this measure that the session would remain open and would sine die on Thursday, April the 11th, 2025. Yeah. There's only one little bitty problem.
Yeah, that's a Friday.
That's April 10th. Thursday is April 10th. Yeah. And Friday would be April the 11th.
1 week from today is April 11th. That is a Friday. And so
I don't know. We got legislators trolling?
I don't know. I'm not going to attribute motive, but perhaps. I mean, that would be kind of a sick joke, though. They were trolling with that. But who knows at this point, Gerard? But the governor did outline, though, that he does plan to send us to a special session. Yeah. He doesn't want it to be long. He said he made it clear he didn't want to spend a lot of taxpayer dollars. We know that it cost over six figures of taxpayer dollars to have these people, to feed them, to house them, et cetera, have them in the Capitol. And so, but the governor he's going to be able to set the agenda for this special session, though. And so if he has some other things he wants to iron out other than the budget, and he mentioned some by name like school choice, certificate of need reform,
right.
Mobile sports betting, et cetera. Well, we could see some of those bills revived too, Gerard.
Ben from Madison said every dime spent on the special session should be paid by the speakers and the lieutenant governor's salaries. They are both to blame, in my opinion. I don't think their salaries quite cover it, though, Ben.
Well, they're going to have to take out some loans, but
I hear you, though.
I get the taxpayer frustration, though. I get the taxpayer frustration that this could have been handled.
Yep.
And to the House's credit, the House gave the Senate a lifeline to get this done within the legislative session, and the Senate said no. But also, I understand the Senate's qualms, too. They said, we have conference weekend. This is what we do. You guys didn't show up. But I will say that's kind of an argument that won't fall on Jason White's ears, because he's been clear that he does not want to represent the status quo in Mississippi.
Right.
And I will say he's held true to that promise.
Well, they sent appropriations and spending and revenue bills, and
I understand
all they need.
I understand the argument that those were not sent signed.
Yeah.
But the truth lies somewhere in the middle there. We'll find out soon.
It's dysfunctional.
Right.
They need to take Rhino up on his procession.
Yeah, no
to
doubt.
move those bills. No confusion under those circumstances.
Well, Gerard, transitioning here, we had some local elections this week, and one with huge bearing is here in Jackson, where we are right now in our state capital, with Mayor Chokwe Lumumba, the incumbent, kind of getting it didn't look good for him Tuesday night. John Horn, who is a state senator who's obviously been on this program and many of our other programs numerous times, and he's been on the city council in Jackson, garnered just about 48.5% of the vote during the Democratic primary on Tuesday, and the mayor incumbent got about 17% of the vote. So it's going to a runoff, but those numbers lead you to believe that, when we go to April 22nd in the the runoff, John Horn's a clear favorite in this, and so it looks like Jackson could be getting a new mayor. Now, how much of the vote went against the mayor Lumumba for his alleged involvement in a federal bribery scandal, and him being under the gun by the FBI and others, and how much did that sway voters? I'm not sure, but I do know that there is a bit of fatigue in Jackson, where some do want new leadership, and so that's a race to keep an eye on. And others, like the city of Flowood, here, one of our suburbs, got its third ever mayor, Gary Rhodes, the longtime mayor who kind of built the city, retired, and Kathy Smith, the person he endorsed, she got the seat in Flowood. And we had some incumbents get defeated. Kenny Holloway in Ocean Springs.
That was a little surprising,
Well, he got defeated by the alderman at large.
Sure did.
Yes, and then in Pass Christian, Kenny Torgeson defeated the incumbent Jimmy Rafferty.
Right.
And so we had some
surprised at that too.
Big elections here in Mississippi.
Yeah. All right, Kelly, appreciate you coming in. Great rundown, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Gerard.
We're coming right back in the Element Well studio.
Is everybody ready?
I'm ready. Ready here.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Well, she's fashionably lean, and she's fashionably late. She'll never break a scene, she'll never break a day. But she's no drag, just watch the way she walks. She's a 20th century fox.
Morrison and the Doors, 20th Century Fox. Fashionably late. That's awesome. That was for J.T. Mitchell, our news director. He a big Doors fan. We're back with you in the Element Well studio, just looking at a chart showing the countries most vulnerable to the new tariffs. It's incredible. Vietnam exports to the U.S. as a share of their GDP, 29%. Like I said, they make a bunch of stuff, but nobody can buy what they make. And we're so productive in this country due to technology and innovation and just mass progressive improvement in the production process. We're going to make, even if all that manufacturing comes back to this country, we're going to obviously make a whole lot more, if you think about it, than we consume. We will continue to rely on exports to make ends meet in this country. Our manufacturers will, just as our farming industry does. Our agricultural industry produces way more than we could consume here. The state of Mississippi, the agricultural community in this state, relies heavily on the sale of their goods to foreign countries. You remember in the president's first term when he imposed tariffs on China, our major adversary in the trade war. They then reciprocated. That had an impact on the export of American agricultural products, and it was putting the hurt on a lot of America's farmers. And it necessitated the president, or it certainly prompted him to. You could argue about whether or not it necessitated it, but you remember we doled out about $28 billion of bailout money, subsidies, to our farming industry to counter that loss of revenue. And we did have somebody on the C Spire text line that actually said something on the 662. Y'all talk about this and that, but without a doubt, farming is being hit the hardest, and it has been hell since Trump's first term in office when he made China mad with tariffs and they quit buying soybeans and corn from us. Yeah, so exactly. I was just saying that. I promise we're not lost on that. We've talked about that before. I have on my social media as well. I've informed people that this could have a significant negative impact on the agricultural industry in the state of Mississippi, the country overall. And I'm not sure what the way the federal government would respond and react to that, but we already know that America's farming industry is hurting in Mississippi. You remember when we interviewed the lieutenant governor, Rhino, early on in the session, and that was like a critical issue they were addressing. I'm not sure what became of that, honestly, but the report was that Mississippi's farmers had struggled mightily over the last few years and were having a hard time producing a profit on their farms. And, of course, they rely on loans, financing from Mississippi's banks to pay for everything they need to put their crop in the ground, waiting, of course, for harvest and then ultimate sale of their yield, and then they pay that debt back. And many of the banks in the state were saying, you know what, it's a little too risky. You haven't produced a positive cash flow in the last couple of years, and we barely made it, and you want us to extend these loans to you, but we're concerned about you being able to pay it back. I'm not sure where that stands. And I do know that the tariffs will have an impact. What I hope is that it doesn't cause not the final nail in the old coffin for many of these farmers where they just throw in the towel and shut down. That wouldn't be good for the country. It certainly wouldn't be good for the state of Mississippi. So, again, it's all about the time frame. I know a lot of people say, well, we just have to endure this pain for a while. You know, on the other side, things will be good. There are some that aren't in a position to endure the pain. That's the point. So how do we address that? And I know Mr. Trump, he doesn't want to see these farmers suffer. He doesn't want them to shut down. He knows that. And so will he propose a big batch of subsidies again to keep them afloat till we get on the other side of this thing? And then more importantly, as the texter said here, are we facing a situation where China, one of the main consumers of our farming products, says we're not buying any? And if that should happen, that would certainly put the clamp down on the industry. I mean, the good news is, like I said, we're incredibly productive in this country and what we do make here. And that, again, is the result of massive innovation, massive automation, digitization, all sorts of new technology. And I'm not talking about just robots and machines inside a factory, but as you know, Rhino, even in the farming industry, lots of tools and technology at their disposal, much of which was developed by our own Mississippi State. And the extension services and a lot of the research that goes on there, they're leveraging, have been for a long time. And heck, all kinds of new farming techniques, hydroponics, for example. It doesn't work for everything, but there are a lot of food products that we consume here in this country that are certainly candidates for hydroponics and all sorts of other novel farming methodologies that are great. It's just that we can't eat everything that's being produced, which is mind-boggling when you think about back in the 30s, a third of our country was in the agriculture industry. We barely could feed ourselves with less than half the population. Now we got almost triple the population, and we not only feed ourselves, we feed the rest of the dang world, which is a good thing. So we do need those other countries to buy our stuff. And I do think this is where the president's policies are coming into play. Is it Australia that won't import our beef? I think that's right. And Commerce Secretary Lutnick's pointed that out. He says our beef is better, it's tastier, but Australia bans it to protect their farmers, so we can't sell into their country. Opening up that market would have a huge positive impact on this country. That is one of the goals of these reciprocal tariff policies, to get these other countries to tear down those barriers and let American products in. I definitely support that. Also, on the C-Spire text line, can we have a recall of election of the lieutenant governor? I voted for him, but I wouldn't if I had my vote back again. He's not for most Mississippians or conservative values. I wouldn't think they should get paid for not doing their job. I don't think they should get paid for not doing their job. I see now. You wouldn't get extra if you didn't show up to do your show when you did the makeup show, would you? Yeah, I hear you. So they get per diems. I was trying to find out what that per diem rate is. There'd be 174 in the legislature is the total number, plus the lieutenant governor, and so they are entitled, according to our law, for some per diem. Ben reported earlier, and I've seen others say this as well. You heard Caleb say it, $100,000 a day, so that what works out to be about $700. Is that right? I think per individual to get to that $100,000 a day. It's a little less than $700, 65 or so. 650, pardon me. So I'm
just trying to think if there's anybody else that has to be there that has to be paid.
Well, that's a good point, but they're on salary. You know, they have, so the legislators get paid a salary, as you pointed out. I mean, the session is the session. So if they have to come back for a special session, but they do get per diems, and there's obviously some other expenses associated with operating the legislature. I get that. And I know a lot of people say, why can't they just get together and work all this out and get on the same page? I share their frustrations and concerns. But as I've shared many times as well, we just don't have a consensus on what the best policies are for the state, what the best legislation is. And both sides would call themselves principled conservative Republicans. They just have different points of view on what those principles are. The same is true for the 535, well, it's less than that, 535 total members of the Congress, the House and the Senate combined. You got 53 in the Senate and 218 in the House, so 271 of the 535 there are Republicans. There's no consensus. Thus, we got many of them that are talking about increasing taxes, instituting a new bracket for those who make more than $1 million. I would say that's completely counter to Republican values. Coming right back in the Element Well studio.
Middays with Gerard.
Good for America. Good for fans of justice and truth. Good for us.
SuperTalk Mississippi.
This is what we stand for.
Today on In a Mississippi Minute, as CCR bumps us into this final segment of Hour 2. Today on In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar, you'll hear part 2 of an interview with Seth Power, who went from the gridiron at Mississippi State to the music stage as a singer-songwriter. In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar is presented by Superior Catfish. Remember, there's catfish, then there is Superior Catfish. It's U.S. farm-raised catfish with homegrown flavor. Ask for it by name at your favorite store. Go to SuperiorCatfish.com for more info. We got the Sports Talk team. They're going to be live at Scruggs Farm Lawn and Garden in Saltillo this afternoon for the the Drive Green Spring Sales event. There'll be deals on John Deere commercial mowers at 0% for 48 months and 0% for up to 72 months on all compact tractors. That's a pretty good deal there, Rhino.
Yeah, the people in Saltillo get upset if you say it's in Tupelo, and the people in Tupelo get upset if you say it's in Saltillo. It's right there. You know
exactly. Exactly. I like to call it Appalachia. It's where we are. A little bit of Appalachia in the great state of Mississippi. William and Duffy says, I'm all in on the recall of the lieutenant governor. Man, you're speaking Thomas and Greenwood's language. He may be the most outspoken proponent of a recall process in the state of Mississippi. Technically, sine die was not scheduled until April 6th. So there are 3 days that the Senate did not use and 4 days the House did not use. Special session will not take any longer than that, most likely. So we researched that a little bit. This is on the C Spire text line, and I believe I'm getting this right. You've got to pass appropriations bills within a certain number of days prior to sine die. Senator Nicole Boyd informed us of that in her interview on Wednesday. So that time frame had passed. That date had passed, meaning they couldn't stay in session.
I don't know if that's a statutory length of time or if that was simply due to the structuring of the deadlines on the calendar.
And I'll be honest, I'm not sure either. I just know that the wisdom coming from legislators is that, yeah, we're out of time here, and so we're going to have to go to special session. We can't get this done in the remaining days. So we may have to take another look at that. Also, did want to pass on interesting legislation, Senator Jeremy England's legislation. You remember that was quite contentious about early voting. His original bill, let me make sure I understand the details here, Rhino. Would you have 15 days in his original bill? Or was it 45? I can't remember. But it was no excuse. That was the big change. Maybe it's 45 we have now, I think. But you have to have an excuse, and you have to sign an affidavit and attest to it. And, of course, that would be punishable by law if you forged that or signed it in a fraudulent manner. You really didn't need an excuse would be the reason, but somebody would have to contest it. So His bill would have eliminated the need to have an excuse. You could vote fully before the election. No excuse, early voting, essentially is what it was. And couldn't get that through, so they went into conference and they essentially amended it to just add a few more excuses, if you will. One of those being, I'm working that day. I can't get off of work during that time period. And that then got held up on a motion, and he told me this morning he just let it die, tabled it, said votes aren't there. So no change in the early voting process, absentee voting process here in the state of Mississippi. Would have had change had that legislation passed. Now, I still contend that the whole excuse element of the early voting process is a bit farcical. You just show up and say, oh, let's see, I'm not going to be here. I don't know. There's some other designated required excuses, like 10, I think, Rhino. You and I looked it up on the Secretary of State's website. You just pick one of those. I'm going to be out of the country. Nobody goes back and checks that. You just, again, are attesting to that excuse when you sign that document, that affidavit. And if you're lying on it, somebody goes back, I guess, and says, well, you really didn't need an excuse. I saw you running around town. You could have gone to your precinct and cast a ballot. I guess possibly you would be subject to the legal consequences of that. I don't see that ever happening, honestly.
Looks like the original language was 15 days.
15, okay, so I had that right. 15 days, no excuse, right? 15 days, yep. Well, we're stepping aside for a break right now. We're coming right back with Middays after Fox News and SuperTalk News. Stay with us.
Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It is Middays, Hour 3. The afternoon portion of the program is now live from the Element Well studio on this
Friday, yo.
We are pleased to welcome Richard Robertson, President of and CEO of the Mississippi Hospital Association. Richard, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. Happy Friday.
Yeah, same to you. How long have you been in this role now?
Since September of last year.
Okay. I thought it was just under a year.
Yeah, just under a year. Yeah. I've been with MHA for a while before that. Have been in private practice, worked under several different governors when I was with the state, with the Attorney General's office, at education, Medicaid, private practice. So
you bring a lot of experience.
Checking lots of boxes.
Yeah. Well,
trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
Well, healthcare is incredibly complex, as you know, and then there's a lot of government policy at all levels of government, certainly state and federal, that involve healthcare. I've often said, Richard, that to a great extent, our federal government, our state government is largely in the health insurance business when you think about just how much money flows through Medicare and Medicaid, TRICARE, and so forth.
Well, just, Gerard, so that's a great point. In Mississippi, for our hospitals, if you look at their patients and their payer mixes for those patients, who pays for their patient services that they see in hospitals, it typically runs about 45% Medicare/Medicare Advantage, which is kind of the private derivative of Medicare that a lot of folks choose now.
Yeah.
About 20% is typically Medicaid. Another 3% or so is TRICARE, and that tends to be concentrated around some of our military installations. So, you're talking about Columbus, Meridian, Hattiesburg area with Camp Shelby, down on the coast, of course, a lot of military presence.
Okay.
So just those payers alone, you're pushing 68-70% that is government paid in some shape, form, or fashion. So it's a lot. And then, typically another 8 to 10% are uninsured. They don't have coverage. And that leaves about 20% or so
from
commercial.
The highest payers. And of that commercial mix, what we count in that are some of the federal marketplace exchanges. Yeah.
So you've still got a government presence
commercial
there.
coverage.
And those have grown over the last few years. They've pretty much doubled since the pandemic, the enrollment in the ACA marketplace exchanges. So that government presence in healthcare and who's paying for services, it's primarily in Mississippi and in most other places, it's going to be majority government payer of some shape, form, or fashion.
It's a great point. I'm glad we talked about that because I don't know that the folks in the public know that when hospitals are looking at their payer mix and their source of revenue, that, again, a great deal of it is coming from these various government programs, including the subsidized coverage in these changes, which we're up to, 21, 22 million or so across the country.
Across the country, that's about right. I think the last I saw in Mississippi, it's now pushing 170,000 or so in the exchange.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering that right.
200 is kind of what was in my head.
And so, from a provider perspective, when you talk about negotiating rates and negotiating payments, you don't really negotiate with Medicare. I mean, Medicare has their own standards and their own way of paying for claims, whether you're a physician or whether you're a hospital or any other type of healthcare provider. So Medicare is pretty much what Medicare is going to be.
Yeah.
So, and Medicaid is the same way. The statutes regarding Medicaid in Mississippi define what a lot of the providers get paid. It's maybe 1% of Medicare. So that's statutorily defined in many cases. So providers don't really get a whole lot of flexibility to negotiate their rates with government payers. It's pretty much it is what it is, and you just kind of have to try to make it work.
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting dilemma in some cases. And but what I also like to say, and what a lot of people don't realize, I think, our Mississippi hospitals are the lowest cost in the country. For inpatient and outpatient expenses, Mississippi for years has ranked as the lowest state cost-wise, expense-wise in the country. And some of that's out of necessity because, when you've got a majority of your payers, government payers, you got to try to make that work and try to fit up under that dynamic. So, Mississippi hospitals do a great job of keeping a lid on their cost. Not that it's cheap anywhere for healthcare, but it's better here than it is really in every other state, in my opinion.
So, Richard, we've talked a lot on this show, and especially the last couple of years in the state in general, about this idea of expanding Medicaid, and we've been through that here on the show, exactly what that means. And so I don't want to dwell on that. We beat that horse to death, and of course, not surprising, that didn't really get a lot of attention this session. But in doing so, in just researching for the show, I just happened to review lots of the financial statements that are available, published by the hospitals in Mississippi. Many are cash flow negative. I mean, they're upside down. How are we doing these days?
Well, there's a lag in those reports that get put out. So you're probably seeing a couple of years data.
Annual reports,
that's right.
Year old, yeah.
Yeah, so you might see ones that maybe are 2023. 2024 stuff should be coming out soon.
Just starting to. Depends on their fiscal year.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, what we've seen up until the fall of 2023 when Medicaid and Governor Reeves put out a new methodology for payment that had been catching on across the country with other states, to go to an average commercial rate, basically for your Medicaid population for hospitals. Mm-hmm. But what we had been seeing before then were just what you described: negative cash flow, increases in expenses, decreases in revenue, increases in cost. Much of that was related to what came out of COVID, where everyone's cost, and we still see that, cost going through the roof after COVID.
Especially labor costs, right?
Cost of labor. I mean, when you were having to pay folks $15, $20, $25 an hour that prior to had been making $10 to $15 an hour, doing different things in a hospital, not clinical services necessarily, but just folks that have to be there to fix things, to prepare the food, to prepare the meals, to make sure people get around the hospital in wheelchairs. Mm-hmm. Folks that are vital and critical to that hospital's mission. Everyone saw a pay raise. And then, of course, everyone pretty well publicized that nurses' salaries and compensation was going up during the pandemic and after, to try to make sure that we had enough folks to care for people. And that was the big concern during COVID for sure.
So that waiver that the governor was involved in as well. I mean, he was a pretty strong proponent. Talking about the Medicaid waiver, the payment. Yeah, was amounted to what, $600-700 million, right? To the hospital industry.
Yeah, the net impact of it was about $750 million at the time. I think it's a little bit less. I think the numbers went down a little bit. I think maybe this year is about $40 million less than what it was last year for that program. So, but at the time, it was a $750 million net impact. And, hospitals pay the entire state share for that. In the Medicaid program, the feds put up some money and the states put up money. That's based off of several different things, primarily based off of your economic condition in your state,
per
your
capita
poverty
income
levels. That's right. And Mississippi has for years gotten the highest federal match rate, so we get more federal money than other states do for our Medicaid program. So, but for that supplemental payment program, hospitals pay the entire state share. So it was the single largest benefit for hospitals at that time. It was also a large increase on their taxes that hospitals paid, but when you're getting a return on that investment, it was worth it. So so that was a massive shot in the arm that frankly has kept many of our rural hospitals afloat for the last few years.
So are you concerned that there's some discussion? I mean, I know you're concerned about a lot of things going on in Washington right now, but where there's some scrutiny over that structure about the way that hospitals essentially pay taxes so that they can tap more federal and state money in the form of Medicaid reimbursement.
Yeah, and so those taxes have been around for 40 plus years. The provider tax rate, it's capped at 6% of net patient revenue. And the aggregate. Now, you can tax it in different ways. You don't have to tax it based off of revenue, but whatever dollar amount you tax, and the aggregate needs to stay below that 6% ceiling for all providers, not just hospitals. And so we're very concerned, as are my colleagues in other states. Since I've been in this new role, when I've been to different meetings with my peers in other states, this provider tax issue is a big topic of conversation, because what states did from a financing perspective is to say, well, if we're going to give these special dedicated funds to this particular type of provider, that particular provider needs to step up and pay a tax for it, rather than taxing from the general fund and that sort of things.
Well, I'm sure you know what got the attention in Washington is California, and the way they've been operating their program. They figured out a way to use that.
There are a lot of states that have been pretty creative on some things.
But they're insuring illegals.
Well, there's a lot of stuff.
California
I mean, look, there's a lot of things that have been put into these programs across the country that for years have frankly kept doors open at many hospitals.
Yeah. Well, that's why I asked if you guys are concerned about possible scrutiny and maybe even banning that as a means to tap more federal money.
Yeah, what we're worried about is the ceiling coming down, which then would take hundreds of millions of dollars out of that program potentially.
Well, if you can hang around
with the state tax, there's an implication on the other side.
I get it. If you can hang around, we keep talking.
I'll be here.
Yeah, we got Richard Robertson, President, CEO of the Mississippi Hospital Association, coming right back.
Interrupt this program.
Gerard Gibert.
Here we go.
This is huge news. Huge news. You need to listen to this.
Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk Mississippi.
We are back with you in the Element Well studio. Thanks so much for being with us today. All right, so we're talking to Richard Robertson, President, CEO of the Mississippi Hospital Association. So before we went to break, Richard, I mean, I know you guys are keeping an eye on a lot of stuff going on in Washington. Something else, of course, you're well aware of is we've got enhanced subsidies that are covering a lot of Mississippians, enabling them to get insurance in the ACA exchanges that are scheduled to expire at the end of the year.
That's right.
The enhancements are. And should that happen, that likely would result in many of those folks just going out of coverage. And that could put pressure on the hospitals.
It definitely would. Like I said, I think the numbers have doubled since those subsidies have been in place. And so, our uninsurance rates, our percent of uninsureds has gone down since COVID. It went up immediately when everything kind of blew up in March and April with the whole world and people losing employment. And then folks started to get coverage through the exchange. They got coverage through Medicaid. Those provisions were locked in for a number of years. And then when some of the disenrollment with Medicaid happened, you started seeing Medicaid numbers go down and the exchange plans going up a little bit. And so any change in that affects the uncompensated care that hospitals are providing, which even though the numbers went down because the cost went up, it costs more to take care of patients.
Yeah.
So uninsured patient numbers and raw numbers went down, but the cost of caring for those patients went up. So it's just math.
Yeah.
So we really didn't see a dramatic or a corresponding change in uncompensated care costs because the costs started going so high. So, so it's a crazy. It's kind of like those balloon animals. You squeeze one in, and another end pops up, and you try to twist it and turn it and make it look like something pretty at the end of the day.
So, something else that I'm sure you're watching is concerns about this enhanced Medicaid payment program reform that we're under a waiver on. We were just talking about. I mean, that's also being considered as something they want to terminate in Washington.
That's right. And so, so that program for Mississippi, again, it's hundreds of millions of dollars that are helping keep many of our hospitals, big and small, in the black.
Yeah.
And, but for that program, we're going to see a lot of things walking back. So a lot of my peers across the country have been talking about that and what CMS does with that average commercial rate may change. It used to be pegged to a Medicare rate, which is lower than a commercial rate. So if CMS were to go back to that standard, then that's hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to get taken out of hospitals. So
plus, we already have a low commercial rate in Mississippi.
We already have a low commercial rate in Mississippi. What we have is good, but it's lower than other states. Our percent of employment covered commercial care is lower. That wasn't a thing until about 100 or so years ago, coming out of the 20s and 30s when employers started pushing.
Yeah, it's World War II.
They came up with a way to attract folks to come into the workforce and be more competitive, and so businesses were offering employment covered insurance services as a way to attract people back in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we really got into the advent of employer-sponsored coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great when you've got it. But man, it's scary when you don't. And it's a, look, the whole healthcare fabric, it is very complicated. It's a quilt, and sometimes it's a good patchwork, sometimes it's not so good. And, again, I talk all the time about our hospitals in Mississippi providing good quality services. We typically are in the 20s or so on those leapfrog studies on quality, and our costs are the lowest in the country. So I think across the board our hospitals are doing as good as they can do to take care of their patients and providing good quality at a low cost, which is really the goal for everything, right? You want a good quality at the lowest cost you can get it. But it still takes revenue to keep the lights on and to employ physicians and nurses and folks that work in food and environmental services and keep the hospitals clean. And it's not just hospitals, it's our physician clinic offices, it's our therapists that provide care for speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, mental health services. And all those things are important in the whole fabric of healthcare. And, it does take money to provide those services.
So we had Representative Dana McClain on the program a couple of weeks ago talking about legislation that she introduced that would require hospitals to maintain rape kits. Yes. She made the case for that. Well, what's the Hospital Association's position on that?
Yeah, so we met early on back in January and said, look, there's some things that we see in this original bill that we need to tweak just to comply with EMTALA. Hospitals are under a federal law that was signed in the 1980s by President Reagan.
Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, Reagan signed that law, and it provides that hospitals shall treat first screen, diagnose, treat, or transfer patients that come into the emergency department regardless of their ability to pay. And so there were some provisions that were in the original draft that we said, it potentially conflicts with federal law, which, anytime federal law is conflicted with, federal law is going to supersede it. Right. So let's try to make this thing effective if we can. And make it comply with federal law. So that's what we have suggested. But we have from the beginning, and I said this from the very first meeting I had with folks and with Representative McClain on this, you're not going to find a bigger advocate for victims of sexual assault than me or than the Mississippi Hospital Association. As a husband, father of daughters, that's something near and dear to my heart, and we're going to support that, and I'm glad to see that the legislature stepped up and passed that, and I think Angela Hill from the floor of the Senate made sure people knew that MHA had supported that bill.
I mean, so you don't have any, the association doesn't have any conceptual objection to this?
Other than our suggestion on fixing the tweak with the EMTALA provisions, which I think that's been taken care of in this ultimate bill that came out, where they've got language that tracks with EMTALA that talks about what the hospital would do with treating and screening and treating, and that's where we were all along with all that. So,
as I recall, Richard, the EMTALA original legislation actually states that the hospital must stabilize the patient, something to that effect.
Yeah,
remember that?
You got to make sure the patient is stable before you transfer them.
Okay.
And so you can't just send a patient out that's bleeding out or something crazy.
Even though they can't pay.
Put them on a truck. Yeah, that's right. So EMTALA requires that hospitals provide those services in the ER setting regardless of ability to pay. So, if someone gets wheeled in there and they've been shot, bleeding out, you don't stop them and say, hey, what's your form of insurance and are you going to be able to pay the bill? And if the answer is no, I'm sorry, we're going to have to roll you back out in the parking lot. That doesn't happen.
Hasn't since 86.
Since that and law. I'm not even sure some of that was happening before 86, but it certainly happened since then. That's right.
I mean, it's law now.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
And
that's
the L stands for labor. So if someone shows up at the ER and they're in labor, you got to take care of them.
You got to take care of them. You don't stop and ask mom, hey, can we get your insurance information here and make sure that that you're going to pay us before we deliver that baby. That's just not what they do.
Probably the only industry in the country that's like that.
I would imagine.
You can't stop and say, hey, can you pay before we take care of your...
I'm probably not going down to the Kroger on 55 after this interview and bagging a bunch of groceries and taking them home just because I'm hungry and saying I'll pay you later. That's probably not going to work too well.
I agree. House Bill 17, white-brown bagging. What's that all about?
So, that was a great bill, and I really applaud our legislature for passing that. And, it's been a challenge, particularly for patients that are receiving physician-administered drugs. So think about patients that go for cancer treatments. Many times the insurance company will say, well, we'll ship the drug to you. Don't order it through your supply chain. We'll ship it to the hospital or to your clinic. And sometimes it gets there on time, sometimes it doesn't. In other cases, like for brown bagging, they may ship it to the patient's home. And so then that patient shows up at the doctor's office and says, here, I've got my medicine. Will you shoot it in my arm? And from a physician standpoint, you hope that there's been a secure chain of custody. You hope it's been properly refrigerated. You hope when that drug arrives at your clinic, you've got room in the refrigerator to store it. But you don't necessarily know from a supply chain perspective if you will or not. And so, I can't take my car up to Firestone and take a new set of brakes and say, hey, I'd like for you to put this on my car. They're going to say, no, we've got our own way of making sure we've got secure chain. So we'd had concerns, and folks had expressed concerns about chain of custody, legal liability. Putting my lawyer hat on, if somebody's handing me something, I don't know where it came from. Sure. Sometimes that's a concern. So, look, I think it's a good bill. It's focused on patients, and hopefully this is going to help patients that really need those most intense types of drug therapies get the drugs that they need on time with the provider that they need to get it from.
Gotcha. In about 30 seconds, can you talk about 662, presumptive eligibility?
Yeah, so presumptive eligibility is just a great way to take care of pregnant women before they get determined eligible for Medicaid. It takes maybe 2-3 months before they get that eligibility determination. What this does is allow providers to say, we're going to presume you're eligible for Medicaid so we can go ahead and start preventive care, prenatal care now, and that mom and that baby don't wait 3 months.
That was passed last year, wasn't it?
It was passed last year. They had to make some tweaks to it because of some federal conflicts in there. Again, trying to comply with federal law.
Gotcha. Makes total sense. Richard, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me. Always good to visit with you.
It was great. Richard Robertson, President and CEO of the Mississippi Hospital Association, has been our guest. Right back with you in the Element Wealth studio.
Gerard Gibert. Going beyond the headlines, breaking down the stories that matter to Mississippi. Middays with Gerard on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. Good discussion there with Richard Robertson, President, CEO of the Mississippi Hospital Association. Lots of complexities, as you well know, Rhino, in the healthcare industry. And what complicates it is the fact that there's a middle party in just a financial relationship in the ecosystem there. You got the patients, you got the providers, and you got somebody else that pays. And that's one of the myriad of insurers, either commercial or government. And there's all sorts of elements of that, deviations of that, if you will. That just complicates it big time. And when you think about folks in Washington, folks in our capital here in Mississippi that are responsible for lawmaking around much of that part of our society, they have to rely on lots of people that know this stuff to help them and advise them. This is where sometimes lobbyists will play a role, associations, like the Hospital Association, or the direct participants in an industry, hospitals, clinics, providers, pharmaceutical companies. Good grief, the PBM bill in Mississippi. That's just been as controversial as anything I've seen, but I think that's just further evidence of how complex is the healthcare ecosystem. Once again, because there are third parties involved in paying. Can you imagine how complicated things would be if you walked into a McDonald's and ordered something and said, oh, somebody else is going to pay for me here. Wait a second. That's really what this is. Oh, no, we don't pay for the pickles, right? You got to take those off. We're sending you a bill for that. I'm exaggerating. I know that's a crazy example, but it ain't far off of reality. All you got to do is look at an explanation of benefits. Oh, aren't you glad we passed a law requiring that? Because they don't explain squat for the most part. I mean, it is crazy when you think about it. And I'm not sure necessarily what the solution is to it, because vast majority of people, they cannot pay out of pocket for their health care. And if you think about the fact that most of the care you're going to receive in your life is when you're old, and often that's when you don't have any income, and you're less suited financially, less prepared to take on that expense. So you can understand why a lot of people get nervous, especially older folks, when they experience and are working through the tangled web that is Medicare and commercial insurance and PBMs and drugs and all that other stuff. It's just really complicated. And I think it seems to have increased in complexity over the years, and the ACA sure as hell didn't simplify it, made it considerably more complicated. That was one of the goals, was to simplify. I think they fell a little short on that objective. Man, oh man. Matt in Burnsville says we need to be rolling back regulations on health care. More government doesn't solve problems. created by more government. Agree. The problem we have, Matt, is that everybody's paid into Medicare their whole life. Now we got about 50 million people in the country on Medicare and 75 or so on Medicaid. So think about that. In a country, and another 20 million on ACA exchanges in a country with 330 million people, 170 million of them, roughly half, are on some sort of insurance that involves the government. That's why I say many times that our government's in the health insurance business. In the state of Mississippi, when you think about the Medicaid program, combined federal and state funding being roughly $8 billion a year, heck, our whole general fund budget in Mississippi is only $7 billion. If you take out the Medicaid portion of it, it's only $6 billion. So the Medicaid program is roughly a third larger than the entire general fund budget in Mississippi. 750,000 Mississippians on Medicaid. Our goal should be to continue to boost the state's economy, lift people up in their income so that they don't need Medicaid. Right now, of course, that's children. They're the biggest coverage group, 450,000 in Mississippi. Nationwide, it's 45 million children in the Medicaid program. That's because they reside in households that have a very low income that qualifies them for it. Ostensibly, there's no doubt there's some defrauding of that. We need an army of people, honestly, to police all that stuff. Man, oh man. The governor should call a special session for the ballot initiative process, school choice, con laws, and the budget. I don't think that's Kevin on the road. He wouldn't do that, Kevin, because the votes in the Senate and the House are not there for anything but the budget. And he's made it pretty clear he's not going to call a special session if he doesn't feel that the votes are there to pass that legislation.
What was the phrase he used? Go to your corners and towel off?
Yeah, exactly right. And that's kind of what happened here. So there's just no agreement. There's no consensus on any of those matters. It's not that they're just lazy and couldn't get it done in the regular session and said they can't agree. I would also add that the PERS program right now, that may be part of the budget, but there was no bill to infuse cash funds into the PERS program, and man, the PERS people are pretty concerned about that. I guarantee you they're concerned looking at the markets today, because just like every other defined benefit program in the country, they're heavily reliant, as is Mississippi's public employees retirement system, on returns from the market. That's not going too well the last couple of days. Obviously, you got to look at it over a longer period of time. But the actuaries have said 2 recessions, and I think we're headed for one, but 2 recessions could set back the PERS program to the point where the state would be faced with needing a cash infusion to make ends meet, to cover benefits. That's not something we want, for sure. Let's see what else. Gary in the Berg. This would help what's going on. No income tax on the first $100,000 withdrawn each year from a Roth IRA, which is already exempt. Well, it's the income, the withdrawal's exempt, but you pay tax on the contributions. You're right, though, generally speaking, Gary. No income tax on anyone over age 70 up to $1 million each year is exempt. First 10 years of home mortgage, both principal and interest can be deducted from taxes. Car loan interest is a tax credit, dollar-for-dollar deduction. All that's great, Gary. It's just that would plunge us into more debt. I mean, it's hard to make all that math work out. We're already facing $2 trillion deficits this year. I believe we'll have $2 trillion deficits for the next few years, probably higher than that. And that's even with cutting spending. That's simply because our interest costs are going to keep going up. And yes, it's true that one of the good things, the silver linings about the way the tariffs are pounding the markets is in a possible recession is that we're likely to see interest costs driven downward. That will save taxpayer money. Well, save us from having to borrow as much money to pay the interest. We're literally borrowing money to pay interest, which is asinine. But that's because we don't generate enough revenue to cover the ridiculous spending. So that will help, but keep in mind it's also offset by the fact that we keep adding more principal. So lower interest rate, more principal, we're not really getting ahead. We're just treading water. We disagree. The people want a ballot initiative. The people support school choice. The governor should make these lying charlatans expose themselves. I hear you. That's Andy and Tupelo. I'm all for it, by the way, Andy. I just want you to know that. I just don't think he will. I've never really heard the governor say how he feels about the ballot initiative, Rhino. Have you ever heard him express a viewpoint on that? It doesn't seem to be a high priority with him. He has talked about school choice, although he really invested a lot of cycles, you guys would have to agree, this session on getting the tax bill done. Not as much focused on school choice. I hope he brings it up, but rest assured, it won't pass. It absolutely won't pass. And I'm going to say it again. I said it a couple of weeks ago. I don't mind saying it again. It's 100% about race here in the state of Mississippi. Just is. That's just the truth. Not going to try to shy away from reality. I said he should call one, not that he would. I hear you, and I agree, Kevin on the road. I'm with you. I understood. If I misread it, I apologize for that. Should versus would. We're stepping aside for a break. When we come back, the final segment of Middays. Stay with us.
Gerard Gibert. He keeps his classified documents right where they belong. Inside a Journey record jacket from the 1980s. Gerard Gibert, SuperTalk Mississippi.
Yes, Lou Graham and Foreigner bumping us into this final segment. Before we head home for the weekend, a little weather rolling in as well. Be careful. So, let's see what we got on the C Spire text line. They can't agree because half of our representatives in Jackson are rhinos. Well, all I can say is we voted for them. The solution to this, the remedy, is to vote for somebody different. And as much as I want to get school choice passed, I'm with you on that, Andy. You know that. I mean, I've been lobbying for that. Not that I get paid to lobby for it. I do it because I think it's a great policy for the state of Mississippi. And I've also promoted the ballot initiative. I'm with you guys. Repeal, I did panel discussions where I spoke in favor of repeal of the Certificate of Need laws. The fact is, there are other voices going at these people. And school choice in particular, Andy, and I know you've heard us talk about that before, and I'm putting this message out to everybody. If you're a believer, a proponent of, you favor school choice, and you want to get that done, the way to accomplish that, in my view, is to go to your district school board. Go to your school superintendents because they are working against such legislation. And they are influencing members of the legislature big time. They're there in person. They blow up their phones. They have people representing their positions on behalf of them in the Capitol. It's not that they're not hearing from the other side. They are, big time. And so it's incumbent upon us to really go where the root cause of that is, and that's the school boards and the superintendents. They're the ones that are looking to protect what they have and prevent school choice legislation from passing. You've got strong lobbies against their certificate of need loss. Been working on that for years. And the legislature has entertained legislation, considered legislation, to fully or partially repeal some of those statutes. We just can't get it done. That's just because they get a lot of pressure from others who want to keep them in place. Do you believe state dollars should go to a private school in a town with a great public school? Well, if the school is great, why would anybody want to transfer? I believe people should have a choice about where the state dollars associated with their student should go. It's not public money. It's the money that they have contributed to the pot. They're just having the opportunity and the control over directing it. The idea here is to improve the quality of education, not for just that one student that transfers, for society. That's the goal here. Make public schools better, make private schools better, make home schools better. That's the goal that I think gets lost, Rhino. And I don't mean to sound like I'm preaching here, but I think there's too much, well, we're going to take this dollar and move it here. That's the underlying mechanics. The objective is improve the quality of education overall so that we have a more educated electorate. Educated citizenry. Not the electorate. Yeah, we need that too, by the way. Citizenry. So that our children are better prepared when they graduate to choose their path. Go to college, go to the workforce, what have you. We got to do better. We've made tremendous strides in the state. I credit the governor and many others for that. He touts it. He should. It's got national attention. The Mississippi Miracle, we got a long way to go, though. Just giving people the option. Who's against freedom? That's anti-freedom, is it not? What am I missing, Rhino? Is that not the essence of freedom? You'll end up subsidizing all-white private schools in those towns and tear down the good public school. If the public school's good, why would anybody want to leave? Not only that, in many cases, the amount they get from the state won't be enough to cover the private school education. Plus, no bus is coming to pick them up. That gets lost in the shuffle here. Man, oh man. I just disagree.
It seems like there's a cadre of individuals that are terrified of the possibility of a couple dozen students having a better opportunity for an education, and they fear that moving the chairs around for a couple dozen students is going to upset the apple cart for thousands, and that math just doesn't math.
And to those who say, here's one, school choice will only bring down good schools, and there are a few good public schools. Private schools do not want this. Okay, so you're telling me Florida got it wrong, Iowa got it wrong, Arizona got it wrong. There are 15 states, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee. They're all dumb and we're smart on this issue? Okay, well, let's just stay 50th. I'm tired of it. We're going to keep working on this. Thanks so much for joining us. Back with you again on Monday. Until then, stay safe and God bless.
A SuperTalk Mississippi Media production.